And we are now live on Facebook. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the third of our public forums and podcast version of the debate series of the spring. Welcome and thank you for joining us. We appreciate your support. A few things that we want to make sure that everyone is aware of. First of all, our topic tonight is heated rhetoric won't solve policing. We would appreciate everyone weighing in on this. We have a voting system, which I'll discuss in just a minute. First of all, I have some announcements to make sure that everyone is clear. First of all, our last debate was on smart tech can't be private, and based on the voting system that you all were able to contribute to, our winners were the affirmative team, one of whom is actually with us tonight. So congratulations, Vincent. Congratulations to the affirmative team who were arguing that smart tech can't be private. Our next debate will be on April 1st. The subject of which will be homelessness, and the resolution is homelessness is not the government's problem to solve. Please tune into that. We'll have an excellent guest speaker to start us off to discuss that important topic. I want to talk to you a little bit about the voting system we're going to be using tonight. Our voting system will be using a Google Forms platform to vote. You can find the vote in either the comments section of our live broadcast right now or in our bio on Instagram. If you're tuning into this on YouTube, not live, but after it's been recorded and edited, the link will be in the YouTube description, and you're more than welcome to vote there. The voting system will determine our winner, and because this is an Oxford-style debate, the winners are not simply chosen by whoever gets the most votes, but whoever changes the audience's mind the most from the beginning to the end, which means that it's vital for all of you who are watching to vote right now so we can have a preliminary vote to find out what you thought of this resolution before you heard anybody speak. And then afterwards, you'll vote again a second time to let us know which team ended up persuading you the most, which team either held your vote or changed your vote. You can vote affirmative, negative, or undecided. This is a perfectly respectable position to take, especially on, again, a controversial issue like the issue of heated rhetoric and policing. Again, the resolution for tonight is heated rhetoric won't solve policing. So again, please vote before and after the debate to let us know what you thought. You can also engage with our debaters during the debate tonight by filling out the audience questionnaire. Anybody who has questions for our debaters in the audience who's watching tonight, we will be giving our audience a chance to ask the debaters any questions that they have. So all you have to do is log into the questionnaire that will be in a Google Forms in the comments section of this actual Facebook Live debate, and we will make sure that we monitor them and that we ask your questions. So make sure you have them ready, and we will read them for our excellent, qualified, and super prepared and ready debaters tonight. That said, let's get started with our debate itself. This debate is going to run in 3 rounds. We'll hear opening statements from one person on each side of our debate this evening, after which we'll have our second round where the debaters will have a chance to answer my questions as the moderator. They'll be able to address each other, and they'll also be able to answer your questions from the audience, providing that you fill out the questionnaire that I just mentioned. And then we'll have our third round where we'll have a closing statement from each side of our debaters, after which you can vote a second time, and then we will tally the winners, and we'll announce the winners at our next debate. So that said, let's go ahead and get started. Again, tonight's resolution, please vote on it now, is heated rhetoric won't solve policing. And here to open up the debate on the affirmative side of the resolution that heated rhetoric won't solve policing, we have Caitlin Cox.
We would like to start off by thanking our moderator, Ted, and our opposition, Vincent and Savannah, and everyone tuning into our debate tonight for being here. Before jumping into our opening statement, it is important for us to acknowledge and understand the agreed upon definitions and the premise for this debate. All of us here have agreed that in the most recent climate, a lot of attention has been drawn to the police force and the way they are trained to handle certain situations. We have also agreed that by saying heated rhetoric, we are referring to language that's meant to provoke or elicit a charged reaction and ways citizens have gone about either arguing against the police or defending them. By this, we mean rallies, petitions, and taking to social media to voice their opinions. It is also important to note that we have agreed to discuss the police force as a whole, not the individual officers. No one here today will be arguing whether or not the police force needs to be fixed. As we all know, no organization is perfect, but rather we will be arguing whether or not the ways citizens have gone about voicing their opinions is beneficial or not. It should also be made clear that we are not working to solve policing, but rather to shed light on the inefficient ways many people work to further their agenda. For those who may believe that social media, rallies, and protests are an effective way to shed light on a topic, please do not think you cannot vote for us. We are trying to help you further your efforts in ways that we deem more meaningful. While it is not the only hub for heated rhetoric, many people have turned to social media to share and argue their viewpoints on a variety of topics, but especially those considered to be politically charged, such as whether or not the police force needs to change its policies and procedures. Social media allows people to become internet trolls and pick fights with random people on the internet. The lack of verbal communication and anonymity leads to both sides degrading each other instead of acknowledging that they may even have something in common and try to build off of that, but rather it continues to polarize them. Heated rhetoric leads to further division, while a thoughtful debate leads to finding common ground and solutions. Protests and rallies have also become an increasingly popular form of heated rhetoric, because it allows like-minded people to gather and share their opinions in a fashion likely to gain a lot of media coverage. However, while protests and rallies may start out as a positive, peaceful way to argue your point, it has been proven that they can quickly turn violent, as seen over the past summer and the storming of the Capitol earlier this year. While historically heated rhetoric may have been beneficial for furthering an agenda, in modern-day times, due to social media, people are numb to others' emotions. It is easy to berate a screen, but it is harder to imagine the face behind the screen. Sam and I agree that during the times of civil rights movement, protests and rallies were very efficient because it was one of the only options. However, due to the amount of people turning to social media and protests, their efficiency is drowned out. Going back to our earlier point about how both those pro and anti-police tend to misuse and overuse heated rhetoric such as social media and protests, both sides have had people that are too stubborn to compromise and would rather yell at each other instead of try to work together and find common ground and work to find a solution that appeals to both sides. For this reason and more, my partner and I believe that by actively working with those with more influence than yourself and actually proposing solutions, instead of whining and complaining about how unfair you may think modern-day policing is, you would be part of the solution instead of contributing to the problem. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Caitlin. And to open up the debate again with the resolution, heated rhetoric won't solve policing. On the negative side of that resolution, we have Savannah Day, wherever she is.
Yeah, I'm having a little bit of trouble with the green screen. I'd first like to echo Caitlin and thank everyone for coming and welcome you all. First, I'd like to begin my time by addressing the fact that the conversation we are about to have is a very presumptive one. To those in the audience who feel that the problems with policing are more pressing than the rhetoric surrounding it, you are justified in that. This space is lacking in voices that have been directly or indirectly affected by these issues. Amplifying Black voices should be the focus of any conversation about the adverse effect of community policing. Acknowledging privilege, educating ourselves, and most importantly, actively seeking out ways to aid the community goes hand in hand with that as well. With that, I will begin clarifying the resolution at hand. Heated rhetoric won't solve policing. We have defined rhetoric as not only the way we linguistically handle the discourse about policing, but also the physical manifestations of that discourse. By this I mean protests, intangible actions are fair game during this discussion. Second, the way the resolution is worded implies that there is an inherent problem with policing to be solved. Because of this, we are not disputing the best way to solve that problem or whether there is a problem to begin with. The resolution does that for us. So what the audience should keep in mind during their decision is who has proved what the best way to have the conversation about policing is. I will discuss 3 main points for the remainder of my time. First, that heated rhetoric is necessary. By heated rhetoric, we mean everything you think about that has a bad reputation, from fighting with your uncle on Facebook to protests like the ones we saw during this summer. This rhetoric is necessary because it galvanizes people to action. We've entered the era of what I refer to as influencer activism. Certain groups feel placated by sharing an aesthetically pleasing image to their Instagram story that lists ways to, quote, be an ally, and that's where their activism ends. We can admit that this is an uncomfortable subject, even more so for the people who these issues affect. In order to break people out of this complacency, they are going to need to be confronted by the brutal reality of the situation. I contend that heated rhetoric is the inevitable gateway to meaningful action like policy change, protesting, community outreach, and the progression towards an overall attitude of solidarity and community. Second, not only is this rhetoric necessary, it's natural. The subject of discussion is the validity of a person's humanity. There are those in the audience whose family members are law enforcement. There are those in the audience who fear for their lives every day as people of color. George Floyd was a father. Breonna Taylor was a woman asleep in her own home. These things are highly emotional for everyone involved, and there's no way to have this discussion without feeling uncomfortable, so let's acknowledge that. It is not realistic to think that there is any alternative to heated rhetoric. With heated topics come heated rhetoric. These two things are inextricable. Now, from a constitutional standpoint, heated rhetoric should be considered in the same light as the free speech discussion and the First Amendment. John Stuart Mill argues that free discourse is a necessary condition for intellectual and social progress. To extend the metaphor of policing, we must also be cautious in any attempt to restrict the rhetoric people use, whatever that may be. The point I'm making now rests on the marketplace of ideas theory. In order to be tested for its validity, heated rhetoric needs to be able to compete with other ideas in the marketplace. This idea is fortified in the First Amendment and several Supreme Court cases such as Brandenburg v. Ohio. Lastly, I'd like to preempt a concern that might be in the minds of the audience and one that Caitlin addressed earlier, that being the conflation of heated rhetoric with polarization and the idea that this rhetoric catalyzes political polarization. The annual Political Science Review's case study on polarization in America concluded that, quote, much of the evidence we use presents problems of inference that render conclusions problematic. The most direct evidence, citizens' positions on public policy issues, shows little or no indication of increased mass polarization over the past 2 or 3 decades. Party sorting, an increased correlation between policy views and partisan identification, clearly has occurred, although the extent has been exaggerated. Further, they point out that the implicit assumption most of us make is that the two modes of distribution lie at the extremes, not near the center, meaning a lot of the American public doesn't lie at polar ends of the spectrum, rather on two sides closer to the middle. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Savannah. And thank both of you for excellent opening statements. I want to go ahead and move into round 2 by addressing my first question over to the affirmative team based on what we just heard from the negative side. My first question is, Savannah mentions the fact that sometimes it's important to be uncomfortable in this kind in the context of this kind of controversial issue, that we need to sort of feel discomfort in order to be having the conversation in the right way, and that it's important not to sort of feel as though you're implicitly totally fine with everything. So I want to just pose that over to the affirmative team. Is some discomfort kind of necessary in the spirit of a sort of really truly controversial debate like this, or is it important to make people feel comfortable in order to have the kind of productive conversation you're talking about?
We agree that it is important to have a level of discomfort, but from modern day rhetoric, what we're trying to get at is it doesn't make people feel uncomfortable. It makes people feel like they're being targeted, and you can be uncomfortable and have a conversation. But when you feel like you are being degraded by the other team, that's when people are no longer willing to compromise, and they will just further disagree with them and try to prove their own point and instead of trying to find common ground. So yes, it is important to feel uncomfortable, but it is more important that you aren't polarizing the other side and you are in fact trying to work with them and find common ground, because the diversity in opinion is what leads to the best results. When everyone thinks the same way you do, you just end up going in circles. But when there's a diverse opinion, it makes you think further and how to best solve a problem.
Okay, yeah. The negative side, would you like to respond to that?
Excuse me, sorry, Ted. I actually agree with you, Caitlin, in that discomfort does breed diversity. But at the end of the day, if people are only having those comfortable conversations and are only surrounding themselves in very specific microcosms and promulgating ideology that they already believe in, then we aren't going to get anywhere in terms of diversity of opinion. And this is actually a very luxurious conversation that we're having right now. You and I are both college students. We have the luxury of being able to talk to each other civilly. But if you were to encounter somebody in any other setting, of course you would encounter heated rhetoric. So that's also something to consider.
Okay, response?
Yeah, Ted. So I'd like to mention that we agree with Savannah that heated rhetoric definitely has utility in some settings in terms of addressing national issues. I would contend that the most useful impact of heated rhetoric is to spread awareness and to gain publicity for an issue. In terms of actually putting boots on the ground, if you will, or taking actions that directly enact change, heated rhetoric is not what actually leads to that. There's other things that activists do that actually ends up solving or helping to solve in a way the issue.
Sam, I agree with you. Like, it's a fantastic way to increase awareness. And that's the whole way that like all of our social issues in society are solved. It's because you raise awareness for these major issues. You get those boots on the ground. That's how you get the word out. Like, we've been fighting, we'll use Black Lives Matter since it's applicable to this debate in a way regarding policing. Like, that was a movement that started on social media, and it got a lot of awareness because of it. Because of social media and bringing that awareness, that's why you see these activists, these college students, they turn into these major activists for their city, their state, on a national scale. Social media, as Savannah stated, it helps galvanize and like discuss these kinds of issues, and in order to create the space that is much necessary in order to create the kind of solutions that are needed.
Okay, I hear where you're coming from, Vincent. Could you give me an example maybe of how heated rhetoric specifically, as you and Savannah are saying, leads towards unity or galvanization of a movement? How charged words or elevated aggressive language is conducive towards making progress in terms of unification?
I'll take a perfect example in which I think everyone here can at least get behind, and that's with turtles. There was a major movement online in which it is save the turtles because of plastic straws in the open, and this gained a lot of traction online on social media. And the kind of heated rhetoric that was used were people talking online about, why are you using a straw? Why are you using these kinds of items that are detrimental to the environment and harm animal species such as turtles? And we've seen that kind of success used in the past with other issues besides policing. But even if we take the status quo regarding policing right now, we see that it is effective because it's bringing to light this issue. It's bringing people, allow them to voice their concerns and provide a solution in order to help solve it, because this is an issue that is has been persisting for decades. Ever since the LA riots, we have had an issue of policing. And this has continued to only happen over the course of time. And as we see with social media, as people start having more discussion about it in recent years, we've had things such as body cams. That was a major first step in helping tackle these kinds of issues, in which we saw effective policy measures get put in place because of heated rhetoric.
Affirmative, you can respond, and then I'm going to ask my next question over to the negative team.
I just want to go back to Vincent. Actually, we'll give him a little more talking time to explain to us in the audience how heated rhetoric led towards the adoption of body cams in more police agencies. Can you qualify that for us?
I'll go ahead and take this one. I don't think it's any secret that since the protests that we saw during the summer, police have been pressed to make more safety measures. It's no secret that they have also had to attend racial sensitivity training, and that stems even across policing. Now people in their workplaces have to have that same kind of training, that same kind of awareness, and those kinds of things would not have happened had those protests not happened that summer. And whatever side of the aisle you're on, there are some cities, some municipalities where their police budget actually got increased. If that's the side that you're on, that wouldn't have happened without any protests. That wouldn't have happened without that heated dissent coming from both sides. If you're on the BLM approach, if that's where you lie on the aisle, it is also no secret that a lot of municipalities like LA, Philadelphia, Las Vegas even had their police budgets diverted in order to accommodate the approach of defunding the police. Those things have been reallocated to mental health services. They've been reallocated to education, a number of other things that those protesters were directly calling for.
I would also like to point out that while Savannah mentions how the police budget in some areas has increased, if you look at it, a lot of areas have actually decreased. If you look at LAPD, their budget was cut down by $1 million. Billion.
Right, but saying that is that the heated rhetoric led to that change on both sides.
I'm not done. But if you look at it, what are the organizations in a police department that get defunded first? When you defund the police and you cut down their budget, you get rid of Special Victims Unit. You get rid of all of the special individual areas of the police department. You're not overall defunding the police, like the street cops. You're inevitably going after the smaller ones that aren't protected, like the Special Victims Unit, like the Racial Sensitivity Unit. You end up going after them instead of the cops like you're trying to. And then that takes away the voice from the minority that you're trying to protect. That's what happens when you defund the police and you cut down their budget by half.
Well, that's not necessarily the case. Just because a police department decides to cut the Special Victims Unit or a minority services unit, whatever it may be, isn't indicative across the entire board in terms of what gets cut. As you guys even brought up in your speech, we have to look at the whole, right? Not necessarily the specifics. And on the whole, we see that with heated rhetoric, things have started to improve. We get these policy initiatives that protesters have been wanting, and we're seeing this progress being made as a result.
Let me ask my second question over to the negative team here. So obviously we're talking a lot about heated rhetoric, and we're attributing a lot of that heated rhetoric to the protesters, especially from last summer. But I'd like to sort of just throw an example of heated rhetoric from the other side, the sort of counter argument here. Something like, the hashtag of Blue Lives Matter was very clearly sort of created in response to the Black Lives Matter movement. And I would argue that is heated rhetoric as well. So would you also consider that to be a positive contribution to the conversation? Where does sort of the heated rhetoric on that side of the aisle kind of land on your ears, and how does it fit into your argument?
Yeah, so I would actually like to refer back to the last part of my opening statement regarding the First Amendment and regarding that theory of the marketplace of ideas. So if there is no pushback coming from the Blue Lives Matter crowd and the Black Lives Matter crowd, if there isn't that pushback between them, there is no way for the validity of those ideas to get tested. If it were the case that you would only see the Black Lives Matter side of things, if that were all that you got to see, then there would be no way to know how true it was. There would be no way to know how valuable it is. And so when you have that contrast of ideas, obviously just like with anything in life, it's about balance. So you do need those countering opinions in order to sort of see where you are on the spectrum, as many people do.
Affirmative, you want to respond to that?
Yeah, we would love to, Ted. So I totally agree with what Savannah just said. And in order to come together as a society or a community or a group of constituents and address an issue or a systematic problem that's taking place in our nation, we must have a platform where contrasting ideas can be heard. And heated rhetoric does not lend itself towards different ideas being heard. Heated rhetoric, in fact, does the exact opposite. If you and I were to engage in heated rhetoric, we'll quickly get to the point where neither of us are giving thought or even listening to the perspective of our opponent, but we're rather so ingrained and we're digging our heels so deep in the side that we've chosen that it becomes a battle where no progress is made. And so, yes, we do have to have discussions and debates to tackle these major issues that we face in our country, but approaching them with heated rhetoric is not going to get us to a solution. Rather, approaching them with an open mind and patience and kindness to allow every person to voice their opinion. That's what we need, not argument and chaos.
Response?
I agree with Sam that we have to have discussion in regards to these things. But the only way that you have true, meaningful discussion is with heated rhetoric. Because let's be real here. The only time true action is made is when people are passionate about something. They put their words behind an action. That's what heated rhetoric does. It helps build the bridge between words and action, ensuring that the words that are being said in the streets protesting policing get solved on pen and paper with policy. The only way that you bring about policing as an issue in the first place and give it a platform is because you have a group of people that are passionate about it. They see it as an issue and they have a passion to solve it. Both teams here are in this debate because they are passionate about arguing this issue. That's important. We're having a heated rhetoric discussion right now. Does that mean that this debate, this conversation is bad? No, it doesn't, because we are exchanging ideas with one another, which is fundamental to these kinds of issues being solved.
Vincent, I'd just like to say that I think if the conversation that we're currently having constitutes as heated rhetoric, then we need to circle back really quickly and make sure we're on the same page in terms of definitions, because we defined heated rhetoric as charged language that inherently in one fashion or another discounts or overlooks or completely oppresses the opinion of the opponent. And so I'd like to hear you define heated rhetoric as you'd like to discuss it for the remainder of the debate.
Yeah, I can do it. So the thing is,
Muted.
Like Savannah had said in her constructive, heated rhetoric can have a range of things, whether that's you arguing with your uncle over Facebook or out in the streets protesting. It's eliciting a charged response. There are still charged responses between you and I right now, Sam, in regards to our responses. We may not be screaming at each other yet, but given our track record, I'm sure that'll happen at some point in the debate. But the bottom line is that there are emotions, there's passion behind the words we are speaking. I'm passionate about the negative side because I think that our side is a lot better than yours. If that gets you enough in terms of the chargedness, Sam, hopefully that elicits, tougher response out of you.
I want to make sure that we're sort of laser focused on exactly what we're addressing here tonight. So I appreciate the fact that we're talking about heated rhetoric in general and protests in general. I want to throw a question kind of at both sides right now and ask, what is it other than the obvious that makes policing and the issues and the conversations around policing, what is it that makes that particular topic a special one and a special case in terms of how it is that heated rhetoric specifically kind of comes into question or is even better suited for that particular topic? I mean, what is it about this particular issue that so desperately either needs or so desperately needs to not have heated rhetoric on either side? I don't care.
Well, there's a lot of gray areas when you look at the relationship between a police department and a larger community. And so when we look at trying to bridge the gap of division between a community and a police force, or have a greater sense of unity or acceptance among the two different organizations, it's kind of different because there's a power dynamic involved, right? Because police departments, even at a local level, is still a government agency, and therefore they're kind of an authority. So if they use their power in a way that's not well received by a member of my community, it becomes more complicated because there's already a factor of authority involved there. And so in order to see eye to eye, in order to interact with me as a member of the community, with a police officer, charged language isn't going to help us to see eye to eye and to improve our relationship and understanding of one another. And,
each one.
So to take it back to your initial, sorry, Caitlin, I didn't know you were speaking.
Go.
Go for it.
piggybacking off of what Sam said, using charged language, people seem to it seems like in modern days, people forget that police officers are human too. They make mistakes as well. They get annoyed as well. Going after them using language like F the police, F12, that's not going to elicit a positive response and they're not going to want to work with you. But if you bring your opinions and your problems to them in a normal, respectable manner, they're more likely to listen to you. But just going at them, shouting obscenities, that's not going to help your case. That's just going to further alienate you from them instead of trying to work to bring you guys together.
Okay, and the negative side again, what is it about this particular issue that sort of demands the kind of rhetoric that you're talking about?
Yeah, so to take it back to your question, Ted, and also to incorporate what Caitlin just ended on, this is so important because it is so wide-ranging. A lot of people don't realize that this topic actually permeates more of our life than we think that it does. In my opening, I talked about the First Amendment and how this is involved in the free speech discussion. So this is actually not the case of a theoretical discussion anymore. Kentucky recently just passed a statute where they have made it a misdemeanor to, quote, accost, insult, taunt, or challenge a law enforcement officer with offensive or derisive words or by gesture or other physical contact that would have a direct tendency to provoke a violent response from the perspective of a reasonable and prudent person. We have now gotten to the point where this is legislation that's a direct infringement on our rights as individuals, and it's this condemnation of heated rhetoric that leads to our personal rights being eroded.
Okay. I have one more question I'm going to throw out to both sides here, and then we're going to move to some audience questions. So those of you who are watching in the audience, feel free to submit your questions into our questionnaire within the next few minutes, and we'll make sure to read them on the air and ask them directly of all of our debaters. But my final question I'm going to have, again, I'm going to sort of throw out to everybody to answer, is I think both sides right now are talking about the concept of the Black Lives Matter protesters and the concept of police. What they're trying to do is sort of express a very specific lived experience, right? That it's trying to sort of have the other side recognize that this is what it's like to sort of be a police officer. This is what it's like to be a Black citizen in America. So I would just like to hear from both sides. Why is it, from the negative, why is it that the nature of this heated rhetoric is the best way to express that lived experience? And on the affirmative, why is heated rhetoric not a great sort of venue to use to express that lived experience to the other side?
Okay, thanks, Ted. I'll start. So heated rhetoric is not a productive approach because it ultimately doesn't provide a platform for all ideas to be voiced. One second, we're gonna collect our ideas over here. Let the neg say a thing or two here.
Okay, so then I'll turn to the negative then. So what is it about heated rhetoric that makes it the best way to sort of express that lived experience?
Again, to reference my opening speech, the subject of discussion is the validity of a person's humanity. Of course, when you're talking about the very real and the very brutal violence that a lot of people experience, that a lot of people bear witness to, and then are also called to witness again on social media, is the only way to convey that in a real way. Sam said earlier that heated rhetoric is not appropriate. I can also proffer that state violence is not appropriate. So it's if I'm being quite frank, it's unfair to sugarcoat these things. If you are not using heated rhetoric when you're discussing Rodney King, when you're discussing George Floyd, when you're discussing all of these things, it's not doing them due diligence, and it's not getting us any kind of restorative justice.
Sorry, Ted, I got distracted a moment ago, but I remember my point now. To answer your question, heated rhetoric is really not an effective or by any means the best tool because it's not as good as polite rhetoric, let alone many other avenues by which a concerned citizen might try to inspire a change from lawmakers or from local leaders. And so we're proposing that if I only have one day, say I have 8 hours in my day, 8 to 5, and I want to have the greatest impact that I could possibly have, we're proposing that through perhaps for some of that time engaging in polite conversations and debates, as well as volunteering, getting in touch with people who are actually responsible for setting policy in the areas that we don't agree with, ultimately taking up action in those sorts of ways is going to have a much greater impact than getting a group together to march down Main Street.
Okay, thank you. And just very quickly, Sam, can you tell me when you say polite rhetoric, can you tell me exactly what it is that your side is suggesting that means?
Yeah, so I would suggest that right now we're engaged in polite rhetoric, Ted. Vincent earlier said that he believed that we were engaged in heated rhetoric, but that's not consistent with the definitions that the AF set for this debate. And so I would say, this is polite rhetoric because I'm listening to everything that every other participant has to say. I'm considering it before, without any preconceived notions or assumptions or biased lenses, at least to the best of my ability. I'm not using aggressive language. I'm not belittling my opponents. So I would suggest that this is not heated rhetoric. And if it were heated rhetoric, we probably wouldn't cover much ground over the whole debate.
All right, thank you, Sam. We have a whole lot of really great audience questions. You guys have obviously been doing a great job because it's been stirring up a lot of concerns. So I'm going to throw the first audience question over to the negative side. And the first question here is, do you think that heated rhetoric is the best way to try to address and solve this issue, or is it simply one of the many sort of good ways?
I'd say, Ted, that heated rhetoric is actually the best way to solve this issue, because with heated rhetoric, this is going back on Sam's previous statements, the great thing about it is that it leads to things like fact-checking, calling out the other side on whether or not their point actually has any validity to it. And that's extremely important if we're having a discussion on meaningful solutions to these kinds of issues. You want to make sure that the solution being driven is actually fact-checked. We see with heated rhetoric that it has been successful in the past. If we take a trip back to 2014, when we saw policing start gaining a lot of traction in terms of heated rhetoric online, we saw that body cams got introduced as a result of heated rhetoric. And we see police departments all around the nation, they're starting to adopt body cams because of the kind of heated rhetoric that we saw back in 2014.
Response?
We would like to start off by saying that we do not believe that heated rhetoric leads to fact-checking. We believe it leads to polarization, and that's been our whole point. We've never said that it leads to fact-checking.
My second question here, not mine, the second audience question here, I'm going to throw over to the affirmative. And the question here is it realistic to expect rhetoric that isn't heated around issues that are by their very nature controversial, and particularly obviously the topic that we're talking about tonight? Is it realistic to expect the sort of polite rhetoric that you're talking about?
Yeah, that's a good question, Ted.
Not mine, it's from the audience. I can't take credit.
Oh, well, to whoever sent us that question, thank you. That's a good one. I do think it's realistic to expect interactions between people on any level, whether it's interactions between members of an oppressed community or interactions between the highest level lawmakers in their area. It's realistic to expect non-heated rhetoric, because if they're looking to solve a problem, using charged language and staying close-minded is not going to be conducive to gaining any progress or getting any closer to addressing an issue that both sides want to address. Both sides are going to have to agree to have a civil, polite conversation with polite discourse if they actually want to start working together to make a change.
Does the negative want to respond to that? Oh, sorry, Caitlin, do you have
a good way to think about it would be, say that you're at work and you have a conflict with your coworker. Would you go to your coworker and start yelling and screaming at them, telling them that they're wrong? Or would you go up to them and be like, hey, this is what, like, would you try to have like a civil conversation? Yes, you wouldn't instantly go straight to yelling at each other. And that's exactly what the neg is trying to say. It's like, if the best way is through heated rhetoric, then why wouldn't, in every single conflict, why wouldn't you instantly go straight to yelling? Why would you try to be civil like most people are? You can't solve problems and find a solution that appeals to both sides through yelling and screaming at each other. You have to stay calm. And as Sam said, you have to use polite rhetoric instead of heated rhetoric.
Yeah, does the negative want to respond to that?
Yeah, so honestly, Caitlin, no, I won't stay calm in the face of state-sanctioned violence. This is a very important topic and one that people are quite literally dying over. So if someone wanted to have a conversation with me and say they disagreed with me to an extent, I would most certainly yell and scream at them. Maybe not right now, obviously, because we're engaged in a civil discussion, but this is a very real topic that I cannot stress enough people are dying over. So
I don't see why you wouldn't yell at us right now, Savannah. I mean, it's such an effective tactic. I mean, we can take it. I mean, it's the best way to discuss an issue. So I don't know why you guys.
The laptop speaker on Vincent's laptop.
We can yell at each other at the bar afterwards. Let me throw my next question back over to the negative. So our next audience question is, Caitlin's opening discussed social media and the nature of social media a lot. Does the factor of social media and the miscommunications and the concept of anonymity, does that complicate these kinds of conversations? Does that sort of lead to things like trolling rather than sort of productive conversation when we're looking at this stuff? How does social media factor into your case?
Yeah, so I think the fact that people do rely on some level of anonymity to promulgate the kind of ideology that they want to on the internet, but we're actually living in a completely different area of information and information distribution thanks to the 24-hour news cycle. It's no longer a viable jab to tell someone, oh, well, you get all of your information from Twitter, how informed can you be? We actually have seen more and more it being the case that journalists are pivoting away from the bureaucracy of public media. Now you can find all of their information, all of the things that they write about on Twitter, on Substack, on Patreon. So they're pivoting to different platforms, which I think just goes to show how impactful social media is, because it's changing the entire framework of how we absorb information.
Does the affirmative want to respond to that?
Not really.
No, I do. So Savannah says how it's so impactful and how it's so useful, social media. If it's so useful, why is it censored? Twitter censors the right. Twitter permanently banned former President Donald Trump. Parler was shut down. If it's so important, why don't you believe that both sides should have equal representation? You can't have a discussion. You can't have a one-sided discussion.
Go ahead.
So when you bring up social media organizations, those are actually private organizations. So they are not subject to the same First Amendment rights that we have. So they are able to limit what people say on their platforms, and that's just how the law is. We as individuals, we do enjoy certain First Amendment freedoms, but at the end of the day, it's a matter of law how those corporations choose to censor their social media.
Yes, I understand that it's private. I'm just saying that's not what I'm talking about. I'm saying if you think that it's such a impactful way to talk about it, why aren't you open, or why aren't many people open to multiple opinions? If it's so impactful, why are you so scared of having differing opinions? That's what doesn't make sense.
Yeah, so The point at which people get censored on platforms like Twitter, on platforms like Parler, is when they cross the threshold of inciting violence, of there being an imminent danger that you harm someone. So more often than not, that is going to be the barrier, the threshold that you have to cross in order to get banned. At the end of the day, you can have heated rhetoric with someone, but can you dox them and put their address all over social media? No, you can't. And that's something that private organizations are well within their right to censor.
But many people aren't following that threshold. There are a very prominent right-wing YouTube channel that's also on TikTok and Twitter called the Hodge Twins. They were censored. They were completely banned from TikTok. They were censored on Twitter. They were not promoting violence. They were promoting their opinions, very similar to many organizations and many activists on the left do. They were not inciting violence. They were simply saying what they believe, and they were censored.
Yeah, I agree with Caitlin that when heated rhetoric is used, as it's way overused in our political and societal climate currently, it typically the big media companies don't discriminate fairly, right? So they may be much more keen to censor heated rhetoric that's from a proponent of a perspective that their organization doesn't agree with. And so that happens to be another issue within heated rhetoric, using it to address our problems.
Lest we get onto an entirely different debate about private companies and censorship, because I don't want to get too unfocused here. So let's start. Our next question that we have from the audience is for the affirmative team, and the question here is, why is it the job of people who feel as though they're oppressed and asking for change? Why is it their job to make those they want change from feel comfortable?
I certainly would not say that it's the job of people who are oppressed or who are needy or lacking in some sort of basic thing that they need to improve their standard of living. By no means is it their burden to make people in power feel comfortable. We're not arguing that the discomfort or the anxiety or heightened emotions that take place within heated rhetoric are bad, because those same emotions might take place in an instance of polite conversation. So it's certainly not. It's not about comfort. We're not saying that heated rhetoric is an ineffective tool to lead to lasting change because it makes us uncomfortable. I think going outside of our comfort zone, no matter who it is or what their perspective is, being willing to go outside of their comfort zone and still be open-minded and give credit and thought to what someone else is saying is crucial to making changes.
And that's what we said earlier, because I said that I agreed with Savannah that it is important to be uncomfortable, and that you don't want to be comfortable while arguing. You want to be uncomfortable, but that doesn't mean you have to be impolite.
So I think the one thing is to understand is that with these kinds of discussions, there has to be a level of uncomfortableness. These are issues in which, as Savannah said, people are dying. That's an uncomfortable issue in of itself. With policing, we continue to see it become worse and worse, and yet not a solution in sight. And with them being the figure of authority, why should the one in the driver's seat be comfortable? The one that is creating the issue that is at hand, why should they be the one that is comfortable when they're the ones in control? The people want a solution, and if you allow the authority figure to be comfortable, to let him do what they want, a solution isn't going to be reached from the other side.
Yeah, totally, Vincent. And I got a little scattered and lacked concision in the last response that I gave. But I agree with you completely. No one is entitled to be comfortable, regardless of where they stand in the caste system or in terms of wealth or demographic or whatever. We all need to be 100% invested and sincere about trying to be good Samaritans and good citizens and addressing issues that plague our nation.
Our final question here, and it's kind of one that I think it's a nice one to end on because it's kind of for everybody, and it comes from a viewer named Annie Shearer. And the question here is, it seems as though the negative is arguing that heated rhetoric can galvanize people into action, and it can get them out of the house and into actually sort of trying to go and storm the streets to solve problems. In that the affirmative is arguing that it can lead to polarization and a sort of generalization of the other side. The question here is, can both of those things be true? Can it be the case that people are being polarized and also galvanized into action?
Yeah, I think you can absolutely hold two ideas in your head at the same time. And as I mentioned earlier, I actually did solve for the idea of polarization. So I mentioned the annual political science review, and they state in their study that the idea of polarization has been overinflated to a very exaggerated extent. So people feel that, here's the political spectrum. You have the very far left, and you have the very far right. And while they might get the most publicity, that's not where the everyday person is actually at. They're actually on two modes of the distribution that are closer to the center, although on different sides of the spectrum.
Affirmative.
Ted, could you say what were the two things? Can they be galvanized and what else at the same time?
Can they both be? Can heated rhetoric be polarizing people and also galvanizing them into action?
Yeah, I believe so, because I think ultimately, we heard Vincent say that over the past 2 or 3 decades, there's been no evidence of an increase in mass polarization among the masses. But I believe that Vincent, and correct me if I'm wrong, please, but I believe that was a reference towards individuals and citizens, not government officials or the media. I can't believe that you would even suggest that there were evidence that the media and political officials have not become more heated in their rhetoric over the past 2 to 3 decades. Am I right?
No, not actually completely, Sam. So I did say that the far left and the far right do get the most publicity. That much might be true, but at the end of the day, we do live in a democracy. So the constituency, the government officials are actually a reflection of the constituency. Obviously, we vote one way or another, and then we see that representation in our officials. So to say that the officials have become more polarized, but the people haven't, doesn't really lie with how our system works.
Okay.
And,
that was just a point of clarification.
And Sam, anything else that you want to say in response to it, you are welcome to say in your closing statement. So, guys, thank you for an excellent second round. And those of you at home, thank you so much for your questions. Now we're going to move to our closing statements. And again, right after that is when you should be voting at home for the second time to determine which side ended up convincing you to either stick with or change your vote. So to close out the side on the affirmative side of the resolution that heated rhetoric won't solve policing, we have Sam Shearer.
All right, thanks, Ted. This has been a good debate. Thank you, Vincent and Savannah, as well. I want to start off by finishing off that point that we were just discussing. It is definitely viable and I guess acceptable for heated rhetoric to lead to galvanization and polarization. What comes to mind when I heard that question is someone who might be labeled a centrist, if you will, someone who isn't extremely involved in staying up to date with current events, that doesn't really go out of their way to become involved in local government campaigns or anything like that. They might just get a whim to become more involved in politics. And as soon as they become exposed to that heated rhetoric, whether it's in person or on the news or via social media, it tends to have an impact on that individual who didn't go into the situation having a strongly held opinion, but comes out with a mindset of my way or the highway, right? Heated rhetoric is not particularly informative. It doesn't help someone to develop a better understanding of the big picture. It is language designed and repeated towards people to sway their beliefs in a certain direction. So I'd like to touch on a couple main points that Caitlin and I are arguing for this debate. Just to remind the audience, this debate should not be judged on whether or not there's a problem with policing. Please, when you submit your final vote for this debate, both teams ask that you base your vote on on which team did a better job proving the motion. Heated rhetoric won't solve policing. So, point number one, heated rhetoric, or an exchange of spicy words, has not proven to be an effective problem-solving tool in our society. In fact, our public forums are often overwhelmed by this sort of charged language. We do not overlook the sincerity of our peers who engage in protests or social media movements. I have attended many such gatherings. Our opponents suggest that heated rhetoric awakens citizens, if you will. And we concede that it, in some cases, can be good at spreading awareness. And activists seek to unify and have their voices heard, which at an individual level, heated rhetoric often achieves. But publicity alone is not enough to enact meaningful change. Caitlin and I are not suggesting that heated rhetoric has never had utility in addressing current issues. Think back to some of the grandest movements that the United States has ever seen. Look at the civil rights movement. That involved a slew of heated rhetoric. But alongside that heated rhetoric came a unified group of people under a leader who was able to establish credibility and ultimately get in touch with people who could make a change. Vincent didn't like that one. Okay. So third and final point, in order to form a movement that delivers lasting material change, we might consider which avenues we devote our time and commitment to. Here's a short anecdote, and I'll make it quick for you, Ted. I got another minute? Jeremy is a college student who's fed up with hearing about instances of police brutality. He attended protests here and there, but he doesn't know the best way to become more involved. He frequents Facebook and other popular social media platforms. He's recently joined several online groups of like-minded people who want to bridge the divide between police and the larger community. Jeremy's friends constantly send him invitations to protest and rallies, but he usually cannot make it due to his busy schedule. He ended up resorting to social media. Many people fall prey to vicarious goal fulfillment, according to a study by Gavin Fitzsimmons and Duke University. A decision science phenomenon whereby a person can feel a goal has been met if they have taken some small action. And this is what we see with the large majority of those who become involved in these on a whim, short-term, marching, heated rhetoric protests. They do that, they check their box, they get their affirmation, but they don't become involved in action. Like getting involved with lawmakers, devoting time and effort and care to communities that are oppressed and are more needy than them, donating to causes and to those in need. Heated rhetoric might make you feel good, and yes, we have the First Amendment. Everyone has the right to speak their mind and to be heard, but heated rhetoric isn't going to get them heard. You gotta have a real conversation like we're having now. And so, to all of you watching, thank you for tuning in. Caitlin and I and Ted and Savannah and Vincent appreciate it. We hope that you took something from this debate, and I urge you to consider the points that we made over this debate, and please vote in affirmation of the motion that heated rhetoric won't solve policing. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Sam. I like the quick, subtle Shearer family shout out to Duke in the closing statement there. Okay, and to close out not only the negative side of the debate, but the entire debate itself, we have Vincent Haaso.
Thank you, Ted. This debate has muddled down to whether heated rhetoric is meaningful and effective in solving the issue of policing. Ultimately, because the negative advances social progression, like the civil rights movement, as Sam said, Savannah and I are proud to negate the resolution. First, do not believe the arguments from the affirmative that heated rhetoric doesn't lead to a solution. The Carnegie Endowment for International Peace explained in December that a prevalent global theme of 2020 was the fact that the entire world protested ending police abuse and systemic discrimination through heated rhetoric. Policing is not just a US problem. It is a global problem, and protests around the world have made that clear through their rhetoric. NPR states last summer that if the United States labels political protests and rhetoric as chaos and carnage, it ultimately delegitimizes the political process of democracy globally. The affirmative discredits heated rhetoric as not being a legitimate solution, but I challenge you to question the affirmative on what the actual solution is, if not heated rhetoric. Policing has been an issue protested for decades in the United States, ever since the beating of Rodney King, but still remains an issue with new names added to the ever-expanding list. You vote for the negative today because heated rhetoric upholds democratic values and pushes for a solution to a global issue. Second, heated rhetoric is necessary because of systemic discrimination, and therefore a check has to be placed on the police. The Lab for Applied Social Science at the University of Maryland found that officers exhibit an implicit bias against Black people and speak less respectfully to them during stops. The Brookings Institution explains that the complaints of misconduct within police departments is flawed because it is normally decided internally and never by a third party. This has allowed for the bad apples to remain and persist in the system. Since efforts of the past have been unable to fix the system, heated rhetoric is needed where the solution is no longer within the system, but a check on the system itself. Sam discusses how there has to be a comfortability through polite discourse. But what we have to understand is that policing is a heated issue. There are people dying every single year as a result of some sort of police brutality incident. Heated rhetoric helps solve this. We've seen this in the past in 2014, in which the protests that occurred during that summer actually led to meaningful policy change through the implementation of body cams. With body cams, we've been able to see policing improve as a result, but work is still needed. And because heated rhetoric at the end of the day pushes forward for social solutions and solves the issues that are at the heart of this issue, Savannah and I urge a negative vote.
Thank you very much, Vincent. Thank you to all four of our excellent debaters tonight. Just a few things to remind the audience of. Please make sure that you vote on either the Google form that is underneath the comments section on our live Facebook feed, or in the description if you're watching this on YouTube, or in our bio if you are watching this on Instagram. Please make sure that you vote to let us know who it is that has either kept or changed your mind throughout this debate. And please make sure that you tune in to find out who won the debate on April 1st at our next resolution, which is going to be homelessness is not the government's problem to solve. We'll be debating that again on April 1st at 7 p.m. Please tune in for that. At the beginning of that debate, we will announce who won tonight's debate. So please make sure that you tune in there if you are as engaged as I was with the conversation tonight. Thank you all for an excellent debate. Heated or not, it ended up being a really great and productive discussion on a necessary topic. Savannah, thank you for appearing again ever so briefly. And we will see you at our next debate. Thank you again very much for joining us.